This is the Work Smart Hypnosis podcast, session number 130. Thomas Safrin on Law Enforcement NLP.
Welcome to the Work Smart Hypnosis podcast with Jason Linett, your professional resource for hypnosis training and outstanding business success. Here's your host, Jason Linett.
Hey there and welcome back. It's Jason Linett here with an outstanding conversation that I know you're going to find a lot of interesting insights inside of, as well as some practical applications of some hypnosis change work, as well as business strategy applications too. You see, inside of this Work Smart Hypnosis series, there are, of course, those moments where I'm interviewing people that you likely already know of. Major hypnosis trainers, authors of some of the greatest books within this profession. There are solo sessions where I'm teaching my own content, either from the change work application or the business side of things. But then again, there's also those moments where I'm featuring people that chances are, for most of you, this is the first time you're meeting them. And this is one of those sessions. Thomas Safrin is a former law enforcement officer that reached out to me a couple of years back and found himself traveling from Georgia up to Virginia to train with me in my hypnosis trainings that I do at my Virginia hypnosis office. And he was an outstanding student from day one and came into it with a rather interesting background, that a former instructor of NLP, yet specifically in terms of interviews, in terms of interrogations, in terms of the applications to that of a police officer, emergency responder, and other related fields. Just fascinating stuff. Thomas and I just recently got to reconnect as he was back in town attending my Work Smart NLP training, and here we are actually having a conversation after class one of the days. A quick side note, I was using my remote sound recording system that day, so we did have a bit of a technical error with the sound. However, a big thanks to my editors over at Audio Adrenaline Studio. They went in, they cleaned up the audio, and it sounds better. It's still got a couple of flaws, a little bit of ringing appears for a few moments, though stick with this information. You're going to find a lot of valuable information inside of it. Thomas is certified with the National Guild of Hypnotists. He's done several other advanced trainings relating to forensic hypnosis, pain control hypnosis, emergency hypnosis, and again, he's also an internationally recognized and respected law enforcement and security professional, trainer, and criminal justice professor. Talk about an outstanding resume. And in this conversation, we're not only going to talk about his background of NLP in terms of working as a law enforcement officer, but also we're going to talk about just the nuts and bolts of somebody who has started up his own hypnosis office and is now actively seeing a bunch of clients. So there's going to be applications inside of all of this information. To learn more about my upcoming trainings, head over to WorkSmartHypnosis.com, or more specifically, WorkSmartHypnosisLive.com. That's the upcoming hypnosis training, plus there's also WorkSmartNLP.com. Are you noticing a bit of a branding thing here going on? Upcoming trainings, live interactive courses. Yes, we've got a ton of information inside of the digital access programs like Hypnotic Workers and Hypnotic Business Systems, though specifically I design my live trainings to help you to become confident and competent in your skills. And the thing that really sets that apart is that live, hands-on, monitored practice, getting the feedback as to what you're doing well, what you can improve upon, and that's what you can learn inside of WorkSmartHypnosisLive.com or WorkSmartNLP.com. Details all over at the show notes. They'll also check out again HypnosisOfSavannah.com to learn more about Thomas. So with that, let's jump right in. This is session number 130, Thomas Safrin on Law Enforcement NLP.
Well, it really wasn't with hypnosis. It was actually with NLP, which of course I've come to find is absolutely related. So kind of the short story goes that I had enough of a strange childhood that it could be an entire series of Jerry Springer shows. And that was at age 9, 10. As I became a teenager, I came across, I can't remember which Tony Robbins book it was. I think it might have been Awaken the Giant Within, Unlimited Power, one of those, and read about NLP. And of course, in that book, it's a very short version of NLP, but I kind of internalized some of that, and then kind of fast forward into my adult life as a police officer, which probably because of all of the childhood issues, had a lot of interaction with the police growing up. I decided I wanted to be one, and then found that NLP was something that we used in interview and interrogation techniques and other communication strategies, and then later became an instructor and found some of these same things were used in education, adult education theory, and was even teaching some of these NLP things as it relates to interviews and interrogation.
In that context, was it being labeled as NLP? Was it being branded as that, or was it being called something else?
Well, they would talk about Bandler and Grinder and the origin and NLP, but then most trainers will call it cognitive interview techniques or something along that line. I've even heard it called kinesic interview techniques, which is maybe slightly different, but so then you fast forward later in my life as an instructor, actually working overseas on a contract for the Department of State, and was just having sort of a casual conversation with a colleague who she's a little odd. You know, we're sitting around talking about what we're going to all do when we get done with the mission. And most people are talking about going back to law enforcement or starting some related thing. And she mentioned hypnotherapy. And I was intrigued. So that night I found myself on like a 12 or 13 hour Google search, just investigating, hypnosis in general, and realized the relationship between hypnosis and NLP. So that led me to start looking at the possibility of actually getting some training. At that time, I guess I was kind of thinking of it in terms of just the law enforcement side of stuff, like let's go to the horse's mouth kind of thing. And studied it a lot of, buying home courses and that kind of stuff for a couple of years, doing a lot of reading, and then finally decided I was going to take a live session, which eventually led me to your course. And I just, somewhere in that decision-making process, kind of decided that I was going to try to do this thing as an actual, one day get out of law enforcement, which I'm still not quite there yet, but yeah.
Yeah, and we tend to bounce around inside of this. I'm curious to go back to those moments of being the instructor of NLP, specifically in that law enforcement environment, where most of the people listening to this would be in the mindset of, oh, here's this pattern for a change. Here's this language pattern maybe in a sales environment, though not many people would have the correlation to go, well, how does that fit into law? Is there a story or two that kind of stands out in terms of how these principles applied over there, whether it's interrogation, whether it's a challenging moment, to say it politely? Is there a story or two that stands out as to how this would be utilized there?
Well, it's interesting that for the most part, I think the value in interviewing, which the distinction between interviews and interrogations is, interviews typically someone who wants to help the police, right? A victim, a witness, something of that sort. And then, of course, an interview could turn into an interrogation if someone's leaving some information out. But oftentimes people will get stuck in their own model of the world, right? A victim, for instance, of an armed robbery will just focus on what the gun looked like, that it was oversized or whatever, without actually even being able to give a description. And so we talk about changing their channel, right? So like relating back to So when you saw the gun, what sounds did you hear around you?
Yeah.
What did the person say? And, and kind of leading them down that to discover, of course, always asking open-ended questions.
Which there's a word that you used inside of that, which should have been part of our dialogue in the last couple of days, that there's very often in hypnosis the dialogue of never lead, yet in that elicitation of what you just said, become aware of the gun, what sounds did you hear? You're basically associating them into an experience and then beginning from there to elicit the submodalities to drive them further into the experience, which is leading in an appropriate way because it's leading for them to recall the information as opposed to leading to create the memory. Correct? Yeah.
Yes. That's a great way of putting it, because you are wanting to lead them. Oftentimes just chronology has a lot to do with an investigation. They may jump from the moment it started to the moment it ended, and we're trying to elicit information in between. So that's an interesting way of putting it. So I want to lead them down that chronology, but I don't want to lead them into confabulating things in between, or if they simply don't know, I don't want them to try to fill in the gap.
Yeah, which this forensic application of it is something that I'd very comfortably say is not my expertise, is not my focus of study, and not really part of what I do, though I'll generalize the story enough that there was a moment where I did work with a lawyer and a specific client to help recall the license plate number, and by doing that, everything matched up. The mark on this car matched up with that car. The evidence was inside. And the way that it was explained to me, well, we never had to mention how the information was remembered. Because for the person to say, well, I remembered this was the license plate number, at that point, everything matched up to go, yep, that's the one who did it. So I'm kind of drawing some connections here and just hear your thoughts on it. I don't know the specific legalities of forensic hypnosis because, again, that's not my expertise. I don't position it to be that, though I can see some benefits that on the NLP side, you're basically, simply put, asking the right questions, drawing the focus in the appropriate ways, and it doesn't have that hypnotic connotation attached to it, does it?
No, well, and it's interesting because, there are actual, first of all, there's case law out there that governs the use of forensic hypnosis. And of course, there's folks like Mark Howell, who's very well known. And in fact, he's really responsible for the state of Texas having a separate certification for forensic hypnotists who are also police officers. So there's a time and a place for that. Although it's interesting that it seems if you don't do an actual hypnotic induction and you do these things conversationally, then who can judge whether someone's in, quote, in trance or not? And, but yet, when we kind of talked earlier about how some of the definitions are about a good investigator or a good interviewer will assist the interviewee in maintaining a highly focused state, which is funny because that is hypnosis, whether eyes are open or eyes are closed. So, it's a very fascinating subject, but I think that the use of the word hypnosis oftentimes becomes a problem in law enforcement too.
Well, it's where, as much as I'm a hypnotist, the training side of what I do is Work Smart Hypnosis. My business and the brick and mortar of seeing clients is Virginia Hypnosis. That's very much a place where I stand by the term. I use it very heavily, and I don't hide from it. Though even dating back to Dave Elman hypnotherapy. Oh, just teach the patient that you're teaching them how to medically relax. Or here's that environment of a law enforcement, of the interview, the interrogation. What about, I'm just curious to hear this. So let's phrase it this way, because I'd love to see where this goes. More of a challenging moment, more of a difficult environment, sort of that on the scene, in the thick of it type experience. What kind of principles would have fallen in there? So responding to a call, as it were.
Gosh, you kind of got me, caught me off guard a little bit because There are a couple of things that stick out in my mind, but I always get to that armed robbery situation. There's one where it's more of a pattern interrupt than...
You just yell sleep and they collapse to the floor, right? Yeah.
No. Gosh, I just can't think of something that's really unusual. Just...
Well, let's go off of that armed robbery example. What are some of the themes that would have been shared there?
Well,
of course, hoping that no one listening to this has to deal with that scenario, though, just to hear the way that these same principles that our community would be attaching to change or persuasion, influence, and all that, in that moment where here's this dangerous environment.
Well, actually what I was referencing was a pattern interrupt that the interviewee did on me. It was just a shocking moment. And that's simply because although as a police officer at that point in my career as a patrol officer, one of the things we try to stay away from is anything routine, right? But I did, in fact, have one routine that I always went to the same convenience store at the beginning of my shift. This particular day, I loaded up my gear into the car and ended up being dispatched on someone else's call in a nearby beat instead of going through my normal routine, at which time shortly, while I was en route to that call, shortly thereafter, a call was dispatched to that convenience store of an armed robbery occurring at that very moment, which of course then upset me because I had relationships with those cashiers, those clerks in the store, and they always knew me. And so when I went to that call that I was dispatched on that I shouldn't have, and then was turned around to go down to the armed robbery, I was probably the third officer on the scene. I actually saw an investigator there interviewing in the middle of the beginning part of that interview, trying to get, exactly what happened, direction of travel that the people left, which of course is important in the immediacy of the moment. But then when that cashier turned and looked at me, this was, again, a bit of a pattern interrupt for me, was the gist of it was, why weren't you here? Sort of like I was expected to be there at that moment. So in any event, with that person, I was kind of secondary in doing that interview. That investigator was kind of looking to me because I just had the relationship and also was familiar with some of my background in interviews and interrogations. And the challenge there, because of the relationship, it lessened that authority state, if that makes sense at all.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that...
Yeah, which I'm looking at times as well inside of this. I want to eventually get over to what you're doing now in terms of seeing clients and what's working for you to get people in, certain experiences you've been having. Though, just to kind of unpack some strategies, we kind of talked about getting into a focused state, which our community will say, that's hypnosis, and then, become aware of the gun and the sounds, the submodality elicitation. On the interrogation side, what are some of the strategies that from our hypnotic community we'd start to recognize would be used there?
Well, it's interesting. In the beginning, we kind of have a rapport segment, even though I know that sounds counterintuitive for someone who's under arrest sitting on the other side of the desk or the table, as it were, and then a detective or a police officer who's made the arrest, perhaps, sitting there asking questions. But so we develop this rapport, might be over a Coke, and finding out what's important to that person in their life. And you'll see that the person tends to have a kinesic shift where they relax a bit. Mm-hmm. They'll start telling you what's important to them. And then, I hate to say it this way, but we end up using that against them in the, more confrontational questioning. And just as an example, if someone identifies a family member, maybe their mother, or if they're affiliated with a church or something like that, maybe their pastor or something, they identify that relationship as being important to them. We see that sort of as a wall of, as I'm talking to them, how am I going to get them to admitting or fully telling me what happened. So if I look at that as a wall, that I can actually use that relationship, as an example. I know that your mother will still love you, even though she knows that, you made this mistake. Something as simple as that. It kind of seems counterintuitive because I'm hitting it head on. But, I just kind of had a flash here. Even in some of the strategies on a roadside for a traffic stop or asking for consent to search a vehicle, we use some of these strategies.
Which so much of it, again, every technique, every principle, it's all modeled after effective communication. It's all modeled after what did people naturally do and how do we replicate that? Though outside of it, and all this left, of course, behind that trail of replicatable strategies, though with everything, it comes back to rapport. It comes back to that calibration. I want to take that story, though, of here you are in that interrogation and the theme of soft skills, where something came from that, and now fast forward the story, there you are back in your office in a couple of days working with a client. How did that experience, how does that translate over to the work you're doing now, actually as that hypnotist role?
Well, now it's actually made it a lot easier for me in terms of like calibration. I really that it's almost second nature to me, just because of the years in law enforcement. I've picked things up without even having to directly look at them. Mm-hmm. And so, in that regard, I can tell physiologically. I really see body language. It seems like sometimes I feel like Superman because of the stuff that you taught. I see the framework now, but realize that I've been doing this all along. In a lot of different ways. And so, in that regard, I think it gives me the right timing and a better understanding of what strategy or technique is going to work best for that particular client. So it really helps me with that client-centered approach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what I was unpacking from that story around, let's say it's the interrogation, they bring up the mother. When I'm working with a client, the mindset's often nothing is an accident, everything is an asset. So they wouldn't have brought up that story of the mother, they wouldn't have made the reference to the child if it didn't in some way connect with this. I'm never looking at anything as just being small talk. So it's where anything you say can be used against you in a court of law. Sounds familiar. So instead, this is the asset we can use later on this session. So whether it's a sleight of mouth pattern, because this used to be the issue, this is the reason why it's not the issue anymore. But I love that aspect of being able to calibrate, being able to read what's going on. Is there a story of working with a client where, of course, generalizing it for obvious purposes, is there a story of working with a client where some of these skills were going, oh yeah, I know this?
Well, it's interesting. I think I already shared the story about my very first formal client.
Oh, they got to hear this.
And so the story goes, like I said, I had just opened my office 2-3 weeks before, and so I got a phone call from a woman who told me initially that she just had anxiety issues. We talked through it, and it felt like a match for both of us. And so she came in, and through the intake, I found out that I couldn't get the easy stop. Like I'm already down to one cigarette, and I just need you to eradicate it. I couldn't get the easy one for the first
Oh, just nighttime snacking. Just knock that out. Everything else is fine.
So I ended up with a client who had, of course, a lot of baggage from her childhood, but that's not what led her to my office. She was in a 20-year bad relationship, abusive relationship with her husband, which that relationship ended when he forced her to watch him commit suicide.
Mm.
And so, again, it's almost, and I've been through a lot of stuff, and that one's a hard one to imagine. I asked her somewhere in the intake, kind of really as a sidebar to soften the moment, like, how did you find out about me? What led you to come in here? And actually found out that she was an acquaintance. I didn't quite remember her. One of those deals where I sort of remembered the name, but I couldn't quite place where from. And in any event, so there she is in the office, and we've gone through this intake, and I actually used the fast fear release that you taught, and a few other strategies, of course, with it. But after 2 years of not going anywhere other than home to work and work to home, literally nowhere in that 2 years, and some days struggling just to go to work because she, as she described it, had anxiety issues, and had actually, before this 2 years, had gone to several other people. So, she's kind of stacking the deck against me in some ways. But just the rapport that we built, and I go back to that calibration. It almost kind of just flowed naturally. And she left that session, and she had to have someone drive her to the session, but she walked out the door, and apparently, she reported to me later in the second session, told him to take her to the mall. And so she went to the mall right after that very first session. She drove herself to the second session, and I keep up with her even to this day, and she's doing extremely well, and building those raving fans.
Nice. So then many people listening to this have gone through trainings and are still kind of in that student mindset of, what do I do with all of this? How do I get started? So kind of walk us through. You trained with me, you wrapped up that. You came in with some knowledge already in kind of a self-study way, very similar actually to how I did it, where I had years of buying books, watching videos and all that, then connecting with an instructor. So what was that process for you from the formal education to then, let's do this, the startup side?
Well, honestly, before I even came to the first session, I was already strategizing, kind of seeing the action in my mind. So I just never could find one of your intensive courses, it just didn't ever line up. So I ended up doing the one that was broken up into 3 separate sections. So probably between the second and the third session of the training, I actually started going out looking for a space, and started, in the whole legal process of creating a DBA under my existing LLC and having things printed and so forth. I really, just as soon as I got back, I was in the process of signing the lease and all of that. My website, I think I was even talking to you, showing you logos and stuff in that final session, and you were kind of giving me some feedback. So I did all of that, and then we talked a lot about workshopping different strategies, and I've hired someone, which I'm somewhat regretful about. Hired someone to improve my SEO rating so I could get in that magical Google 3-pack. I'm there, but I think I paid way too much money for that service.
Likely, yeah.
And then, I won't name names, but there's some other services that I've mentioned to you that I've spent money on that I'm not satisfied.
Well, that's part of the experiment of, again, the unfortunate longer metaphor is Thomas Edison in his lab with the light bulb not working and celebrating when it didn't work. But then again, the discovery of what doesn't work is the discovery of what does work. So then on that note, in terms of, let's go back to just a moment before, making that decision on an office space, what was kind of your criteria for the if you build it, they will come moment?
Right. Well, and, I think I've heard someone else on your podcast, you guys talking about similar things, and I've seen stuff in some of our shared Facebook communities out there, people talking about things. But from my perspective, I didn't want to be like in a strip mall where there's like a Subway and then there's a hypnotist. I wanted to be
Eat fresh, change now.
So I wanted to be in a professional building, and where I'm at in Savannah, Georgia, there are 3 hospitals and a lot of medical buildings, in between those 3 hospitals. So I wanted to be in that area so that I might be able to draw the medical community and build relationships with the medical community for referral purposes. And so, I wanted to be centrally located and fairly convenient for folks who might be traveling from out of town, which I do get quite a few folks within driving distance. But
Were you looking? So you're looking at having your own space rather than something shared.
Yes, I was pretty fortunate to find a really nice office space on a ground floor because I didn't want, I worked with some older folks and I didn't want them to have to climb stairs and things, or if there was a medical issue that would prohibit that. No elevator in this building. It's been around a long time, but it's only 2 stories. But again, I wanted it to be in a professional space. But this is, it's really one room, but it's in a suite. So I have access to restrooms and a kitchen area. And, so there's a couple of other folks in that suite, but I don't ever see them.
Yeah. No, I'm laughing on the inside right now because Northern Virginia, back about 5 years ago was when my wife and I were, our son was on the way. We're going, let's move to a bigger place. And we had to stop watching the House Hunters shows because the cost of living. And you'd hear the couple go, we're looking for a 5-bedroom home on about maybe 3 or 4 acres. And our budget's about $160,000. And we turn it off because they were in Georgia.
Yeah.
Because Northern Virginia, that's, you'll get a closet, apparently. So let me ask you this, because the idea of the startup, there are some people, which I was on the same side of you when I first started, I'm going to get my own space because this is what I want it to be. At the time, I was full-time stage hypnotist. So as I was then opening up what then eventually became Virginia Hypnosis, it didn't fit to be in a temporary space because I couldn't guarantee the same hours every week. So that was my intention to go, it's got to be my own space. I can't play along with others. What was kind of your thinking in terms of jumping in and doing that kind of leap?
Well, for me, I do record all of my sessions, video, and that's more for my protection and the protection of the client, all that's on my forms and stuff. So it was something where because I actually looked at some of these places where you get access for a few hours.
Like the executive office suite type thing. Yeah. Which when a space was under construction that I was in before, I moved to one for 2 months. It was nice, but then back to my hub. Right.
Yeah. I think it could work in a pinch, but the chairs aren't all that comfortable. The noise may or may not be an issue just depending on what else is going on around. So I took those things into consideration. And actually, to be honest, there's a place closer to my home that I would like to be at, but the spaces are much larger and much more expensive, closer to the airport, closer to the interstate. there would be a lot of pluses to being in that area. But, once again, it's kind of weighing your options. For me, it was something that it's mine. It's my stuff, my living. I don't own it, but I lease it.
There's also something to be said around, I've probably told this here before, where I got my start in even stage hypnosis with fundraisers. And I had two options. Option number one, you buy the show, and whatever you sell, you get to keep. Or ticket split option, we split the proceeds. The only of those two that would turn out to be an amazing event, classically, when there were exceptions, of course, was the one that just bought the show. Because they're starting off by going, okay, we have to sell this many tickets, otherwise we've lost money. The other one's coming in and going, it'd be nice if we earned some money. So I've often found it's not the right advice for everybody, is the disclaimer, yet you were clearly on the side that I was, which is no, I'm going to make this work.
Right. Well, and, for me, I just happened to have the right mix of other things going on and still have other things going on, so that if I have a month that isn't quite, there are other things. So I have multiple streams of income. So that, it works for me. It might not be for everybody. And I've talked to several hypnotists who've, gone the route of operating an office in their home. That model just doesn't work for me.
Yeah. Which it works for others, just didn't for you. So then day-to-day activity, then what's working for you now in terms of bringing people in?
Well, honestly, most of it is just word of mouth. It's small. It's still, I don't have a full calendar all the time, but Facebook is working for me.
What specifically on Facebook?
Mostly just me putting stuff on Facebook.
Yeah.
Not Facebook ads, but me putting things on Facebook, and then people so it's almost like word of mouth via Facebook. I have not spent the money on Facebook ads. I've spent some money on other places that I'm not satisfied with.
Yeah.
I mentioned to you earlier, but that's really it. I have taken some downtime, if you'd like to call it that. I don't really have downtime, but I've made some time to just walk around and go see those medical professionals and others in my building and neighboring buildings, and provide them a special offer, that sort of thing. I've had some takers, not a lot, but once again, I have multiple projects going on too, so it's not like I'm really looking to have a full schedule right now. If that makes sense?
Yeah. Though I'd imagine, and not necessarily having to get in the details of the other projects, it's where, again, so often people will take a hypnosis training, people will take an NLP training, and not everybody has the goal of sitting down and doing that work. Not everybody has the goal of working to the full capacity schedule, which is possible. I keep cracking the joke around the time frame of my life, which was titled BC, which is not like 5000 BC. No, BC for me is before children. Where I was doing days, and Michelle was working at the time a job up in D.C. and the commuting back and forth. It's, well, you're not going to be home till 8 o'clock. I'll work from 10 to 8 every day, or 9 to 8 every day. Where there's something we said about finding the capacity that you want. So at this stage in it, is there a certain category, a certain issue that you found that you work really well with, a certain thing that you like working with best?
Well, of course, I see a lot of stop smoking, weight loss clients, but my favorite, and it probably goes back to that first client, I just really enjoy working with people who, whether they call it anxiety or they've been clinically, medically diagnosed with that, I don't know. Some of them, yes, and some of them, no. But of course, I've not run into a doctor yet who said, no, you don't go see the hypnotist.
Yeah.
And I've been very, very successful. I think I shared with you, I had someone come in for stop smoking, And while we're talking about that, she shares with me that she's on, all these medications for anxiety, and she has some other medical issues and whatnot. And of course, she got the doctor's release, and she's actually going to be booking with me soon for weight loss as well. But she shared with me, just through the stop smoking process, that the anxiety that she had previously experienced had gone down. She mentioned having gone to a concert in Jacksonville, which she lives in a rather small town outside of Savannah. And Jacksonville is kind of a bigger city. And she just described how it would always stress her out. She'd have to take extra of her medication and that sort of thing. She said she went to the concert and didn't take any medication and had no problems. She didn't even share with me in that session before the trip that she was going to do anything. I found out later on. But I really enjoy working with anxiety. I think I've talked to, and sort of this conversational hypnosis, but problem solving, maybe just helping people develop strategies for whether or not they've been diagnosed with it or they label it themselves. I try to get them out of that labeling of themselves and that post-traumatic stress. Because of my work in law enforcement and because of my time, overseas in Iraq and stuff, I can relate to what they're talking about, and whether I'm talking about from my personal experience or things that I've learned, are able to help talk them through things. So, again, sometimes it's more effective for those folks if we just don't talk about hypnosis. They're just more willing to say, yeah, I'd like to talk to you, even though I'm using some of those same strategies.
Well, it's where I flashed to something I think I heard Melissa Tiers say years ago, which was that as much as we're there to do the work, sometimes you're the first person they're telling something to. And that alone, at that moment of back to the not the best connection I'm making here, but back to the interrogation of gathering that information and being in that open calibrative state, which again is the get the scripts out of the process, listen to the person, engage in what's there. There's two highlights I wanted to elaborate upon of what you had shared within that. The first one being that you're mentioning, yes, going through the appropriate hoops in terms of making sure if they're seeing a doctor, that's all covered. I love that you highlighted there that, you've never had one that said no. In my career of sending out that release form, if they're on the cocktail of medications and various diagnoses, I've only ever had one that actually didn't want to sign it. And to be fair, it's a reason why I can back up. As he puts it, well, we have this person on our staff here who also does hypnosis. You should see her and keep it in this office where we already have your records, which I can side into that because, well, keep it within the offices and that way there's a collaborative team. Meanwhile, this was actually a person who attended a one-day workshop that I taught. Really? That was her hypnosis training as they were marched back to the doctor's office, the head of this facility locally, and going, yeah, I only took a one day. You should let her see Jason Lynette. And the client's now going, that's who I wanted to see. So it's where there's a lot more open nature inside of it. And your mention of she didn't mention she was going to this concert and she's doing so much better made me flash to the experience of the person going, yeah, I just, my mind is active and falling asleep at night. I think I just need to quiet my mind so I can sleep better. And we dealt with that extremely direct, a whole lot of utilization, a whole lot of anchoring the environment. And session 2, that was great. No, by the way, my night terrors were gone. Wait, what? That might have been helpful information. So in terms of moving things forward, what is it that you're finding there's an interest in doing more of it? What is it there's an interest of bringing this message? Because your journey into this was that indirect nature of learning, here's how we're already doing this on this law enforcement side, then going back to some of the origins of it to go, let's now use this for this helping side. Where do you see this all moving forward? What's the audience? What's the direction you want to go?
Well, Can I talk about the one project that I told you?
Yeah, sure. You like?
So one of the things, a friend of mine and I, a colleague of over 20 years and I are starting up is the Police Academy podcast. And the goal with that is for us, there's other podcasts and other things out there that talk about, all the stuff going on in the news and all that. We're not going to be spending time on that. Instead, for us, we're going to be focusing on the education, training, and even the sort of unofficial training that's out there that any professional should be doing on their own, reading articles and that sort of stuff. And of course, being a source of that ourselves. But I guess my part in this is to kind of paraphrase Mike Mandel. I think he talked one time, it might have been on one of his podcasts, about realizing at some point when he made a transition from his stage hypnosis that he was more of a communicator, right? And so that's kind of the direction that I want to go, where I want to, I do some consulting, but it's kind of been niche specific in law enforcement and security companies. I'd like to continue that, maybe open that up in a larger realm of business. I want to give back to the law enforcement community, and I kind of fancy myself as the unconscious coach in that regard. Particularly training that we do in use of force and things like that. There's the physical training, but more often than not, where a lot of instructors out there may be missing the mental connection, and so I actually hope to be able to help trainers to better those skills so that they can then deliver that training on, and that's kind of what the focus of the Law Enforcement Academy podcast will be.
Outstanding. Love the success that you've been having and the results you've been sharing with your clients. Where can people find out about you online?
Well, right now they can look me up on www.savannahhypnosis.com or hypnosisofsavannah.com, whichever one they would like. I've bought both of them. But my business is Hypnosis of Savannah. We're in Savannah, Georgia. Also upcoming, not quite launched yet, but that lawenforcementacademy.org, O-R-G, either one of those.
Outstanding. It's great having you on here. Keep it all up. Hey there, it's Jason Linett, and once again, as always, thank you so much for interacting with this program. Thank you so much for leaving your feedback, your positive reviews over on iTunes, as well as every other podcast platform that's out there. We're everywhere. And I'd encourage you once again to head over to WorkSmartHypnosis.com, or more specifically to the two upcoming live training events. WorkSmartHypnosisLive.com, as well as WorkSmartNLP.com. So whether your goal is to improve your skills in terms of your hypnosis practices or to become much more influential as well as persuasive, that's what the NLP training is all about. These courses are heavy with hands-on interactive practice that is monitored, so you're getting that feedback as to what you're doing well as what you can improve upon. And a bit of a fun fact, my classes often end up working out being a nice even balance of half the room is brand new to all of this stuff, and the other half are, well, folks like you out there that perhaps have already been trained in some of this stuff, yet the confidence, the results are not yet there. There's some gaps in your training, and they're coming to me to help to fill that in. WorkSmartHypnosisLive.com or WorkSmartNLP.com. Dates and registration details are all online. See you there.
Thanks for listening to the Work Smart Hypnosis podcast at WorkSmartHypnosis.com.
Hey, it's Jason here, and I want you to be the first to find out as we upload new content here online. So do this right now. Click subscribe right next to this video, and you will be the first to find out as I share further resources, further downloads, and other really cool things to come your way. See you soon.